Hello and welcome to Res Forum Live. This is the very first Res Forum Live. My name is John Devitt and I will be your host over the next hour or so. Just before we begin, let me outline exactly what we're trying to achieve here. We're going to be holding what we call a virtual interactive meeting. It's certainly going to be virtual because we're going to be bringing in people from many parts of the world, but not exactly in the normal face-to-face way. It's going to be interactive because we will be bringing in as many of you as possible on YouTube and asking your questions, answering your questions. If you put those questions up, just say hi, tell us where you are, but it's not going to be a meeting as you would expect in the normal sense of the word, because of the extraordinary circumstances that the vast majority of us find ourselves in at the moment, when really most of us can't leave our homes at all. So what we're trying to do is recreate the very best aspects of Res Forum, but in a virtual world. So we'll be hearing from global mobility leaders. We will also be hearing from people around the world, other people connected with the global mobility world from across the globe. We will also be bringing you some of the latest research into global mobility issues. Here in this studio, we'll be introducing a multimedia of different inserts, videos, texts, images, and slides to make this as interactive and exciting as possible. And in addition to that, as I say, we'll be bringing in all of those people who are joining us on YouTube at this moment. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. We have over 100, in fact, we have 130 people signed up for this meeting. So with any luck, most of you will be able to take part. I think if you have a YouTube account, you'll be able to ask questions. Please put those up on the YouTube channel. So to get you into the mood, I'm going to take you over to here, to London. So imagine that you've spent a vast fortune. You're perhaps suffering a bit from jet lag getting here. And I can bring myself in to welcome you. London is a beautiful city, of course, but in complete lockdown. But we've managed to hire a few offices where you'll be able to come and meet up with old friends and acquaintances, meet new friends, and generally talk about the issues that are affecting global mobility at the moment. We've got ourselves some nice meeting rooms where people will be able to move on, move out into breakout sessions as we go forward. The one thing I'm afraid, haven't been able to perfect is the virtual tea, coffee, and biscuits, which we would normally be providing for you. But since you're at home, I guess most of you, that's not going to be a great disadvantage. In fact, you may think that's a bit of an advantage. With that in mind, let me bring you back here to our control room. And you can already see our panel of guests that have arrived, have called in from all around the world. I'll briefly outline the agenda. We'll have various segments as the hour goes through, starting off with a analysis of some survey data, COVID-19 survey data carried out by some senior academics here in the United Kingdom. We'll then have a wider panel discussion. Then our panelists will go into breakout sessions, 3 different breakout sessions, which I'll tell you about later. And while that's happening, all of you joining us on YouTube will be able to listen to me doing an interview with some global mobility leaders. And then those people will come back from their breakout sessions and we'll find out what they discussed. And we will have interaction. Hopefully your questions, when they come up on YouTube, I'll be able to put those to them as well. That's the plan. It's a live broadcast. It's entirely new. Anything can happen in a live broadcast and probably will. But with no further delay, let me take you over to our guests. And there'll be some familiar faces that you'll be able to see there, including David Enser, who is, of course, the managing partner with Res Forum, and various other famous faces from the Res Forum as well. But I'm going to hand over now to David Enser to take control of the next section. He'll be introducing the survey results and also just giving us a general introduction. So over to you, David.
Thank you very much, John. I hope everybody can hear me loud and clear. Welcome to this first Res Forum live session. I'm thrilled, to be honest, that we're doing this. We're trying new things. As John said, we have a wide range of Res Forum members and friends from across the world. We have about 130 people in total joining the session in the Americas, Europe, and Asia. So thank you all for your continued support of Res Forum. For us at Res, it continues to, of course, be a challenge how we navigate COVID-19. Talking about mobility in a time when the world is infinitely less mobile. We ourselves, of course, have had to rethink our existing program of events for the rest of the year. But at the same time, there's also been some very exciting developments which we'll be touching upon in future virtual sessions as well. The first of those is, of course, look out for the notification that will come out to you in the coming days, but we're making all of our Learning Lab content free for a period of time. So you'll all be receiving login instructions for that, and it really does contain a wealth of information about GM, practical help and support, and various other chunks of learning. So, I'd highly recommend taking a look there. We also, of course, have our risk and policy analytics tools, which continue to, I think, help organizations to make informed decisions about how to respond to crises, such as that which we face now. And then, of course, our research program, and today's agenda is centered very much around our research program. We've recently produced papers on working in hostile environments, on duty of care, virtual assignments, remote working, and of course, this COVID-19 study. And this has been done in partnership with Cranfield School of Management and also Newcastle University, Newcastle Business School. And the results of this survey will actually be published in approximately 2 weeks in partnership with EY. So please do look out for that. And last of all, the very last update I give is a very exciting one for Res Forum. As the world is going increasingly digital, so is Res Forum. Do look out for our concept being released in the next weeks. It's called Connected GM. And it really is about leading digital transformation in the management of cross-border staff, touching on compensation, compliance, digital relocation services with a focus on employee experience, and of course, global employee and traveller tracking. So some very exciting things coming out of Res Forum. But for right now, I will switch over to our COVID-19 survey. First of all, I'd like to introduce my two co-panelists. First of all, Michael Dickman from Cranfield School of Management.
Hello, David. Thank you.
Thank you. And Benjamin Bader, live and direct from Newcastle in the northeast of England. Hello, Ben.
Hi. Hello, everybody.
There we are. Great to have you guys here. So obviously you helped us to put together the survey, and we had a very high response rate to this survey. Now, for me, a couple of things, key takeaways that jumped out of it. First of all, 80%, just under 79% of survey respondents were in some way surprised or extremely surprised and very much taken by surprise with the current crisis. For me, that was pretty surprising because, yes, perhaps the scale is different, but this is not the first major incident that global mobility has been faced with in the last year. So that was one thing that jumped out at me. Secondly, also another statistic was 49% of respondent organizations did not have a pre-existing business continuity plan. And that, for me, was, again, a fascinating statistic to see that companies are really being taken by surprise. 28% have actually been obliged to develop one only as a consequence of the current crisis. Now, there are two things that jumped out on me, but I don't want to speak too much, of course. So perhaps, Michael, I can go to you first and ask for your reflections on the survey and our findings.
Yeah, thank you, David, and hello, everyone. Let's do a bit of a role reversal because when we did the survey a few days ago, we got a lot of data, of course, and we will represent lots of this data in the report in about 2 weeks' time. But what I wanted to concentrate today on is actually some of the value add beyond the data. And so what we're doing with the data is to develop a GM COVID crisis framework consisting of 4 parts. The first one you already mentioned a bit, David, the high surprise rate of people who are, or of organizations who hadn't done all the planning yet. So the first part is about crisis planning, which then would lead to be normally better at the second part, which is about crisis action. What should companies do in terms of a crisis? The third part is about short-term crisis impact. And the fourth part is about long-term developments of this crisis. So let me go very briefly before I hand over to Ben, who gives a bit more detail through these four parts. So in terms of crisis planning, companies were hit by surprise with COVID-19, and a lot of companies didn't have emergency policies in place and deployed. So there is a surprise for us. And when you read the report, you can see some part of where some companies can improve. But obviously, what we're doing is we're giving an industry global mobility perspective rather than an individual organizational perspective. We looked at health risk mitigations and the coordination with key stakeholders. That's actually much better in terms of what companies have done. So if they have done this, they would have developed better actions now. And so moving into crisis action, what we looked at is, for example, how they advised, assisted, and evacuated their assignees, the quality of communication, the implementation of adequate medical insurance, which was the highest data and supported and done by organization, and some data on suspension of business travel, for example, which interestingly, while essentially all international travel was suspended, some domestic travel still is going on for crucial business activities. And that very likely depends also on industry and country. For us, fascinating are the crisis impact issues. So in the short term, we're seeing that companies believe a negative impact on global mobility objective achievement. There is a pronounced risk on mental health, so exceptional stress of assignees, lots of worry about their family, loneliness and isolation. But there's also a host country risk that the assignee performance will suffer dramatically because adjustment is suffering, networking is suffering, and on-job performance is suffering. And in reality, we also looked at vendor cooperation, and that doesn't seem to be a big issue for companies as such. These negative health and performance issues right now have an indication of what companies should do now. And when things hopefully return to normal or the resemblance of normality, what they then can do. And I'm sure that they will have to balance different pressures. So the one pressure will be probably that there might be a mini boom and very much to do, while another pressure from the assignees might be, I want to visit my parents, I want to visit my friends or something like that, want to go on vacation. So there will be some pressures that companies have to decide on, and some of them seem to work on a case-to-case basis, while others prefer global approaches. Lastly, and really fascinating, is the long-term crisis impact. So we looked at this, and people, to be fair, about half of organizations believe that there won't be much long-term impact, but a sizable other part, so normally about a third, feel that there will be an increased use of virtual work after the pandemic, and we talked about 1 to 3 years afterwards. There will be reduced business travel, reduced short and long-term assignment activity, and overall, some companies felt they might even decrease international operations. This has a whole raft of implications for global talent and leadership development, for local talent development and investment in local talent, for career planning, succession systems, technology investment, and ultimately a rethink of the global employee value proposition and how global mobility professionals may approach the whole area of global mobility and shape their organization's approaches. Okay, we'll talk more about this obviously in the report, but I want to hand over to Ben, who's going to go into duty of care and other considerations around our data. Ben.
Thank you, Michael. So the first thing that really struck us when we saw how the crisis really unfolded was how well prepared companies are in terms of duty of care. And we know that because we actually did a survey on that last year in December, and the quarterly research report has been just published. And what's very nicely reflected there is the caring about employees and the importance of health insurance, medical things, and everything like that pretty much corresponds to what we find now. And when we look in this particular survey and the data, what we find is there's a lot of overlap between companies in terms of short-term and immediate assessment of risk, immediate assessment of the impact and situation. So that is more or less similar for all companies alike. And what's also similar, there's a tremendous level of uncertainty connected with that. So for the breakout room sessions and the discussion, it would be really interesting to catch up a bit how this has changed, because this is a very recent survey, but yet data collection was closed already 2 weeks ago, and I don't need to tell you that in these times the situation changes daily essentially, and many things we didn't know back then 2 weeks ago we may know now, but then again there's still many things in the near-term future and even long-term future we don't know yet either. And so what we did in the report, we also asked about what do you think is going to happen, like in the, as Michael said, in the longer term future. And it's interesting because when I said in the immediate response, there was a big overlap between companies. We see a spread in the longer term. So while some companies are still more pessimistic in the approach, others are rather optimistic and have an assumption of it's going to go back to normal. So if you think about things like adapting to foreign cultures, if there's going to be an increased risk due to COVID-19, and only 1 in 5 companies said yes, this is a high to extreme risk. The vast majority says it's a moderate risk at best, or even less of a risk. The ability to perform the job properly, the global assignee job, is a moderate risk for half of the companies. But that is mainly related to the uncertainty connected with that. So when they say risk, I mean, there's always a certain risk, but it's not a prediction per se as what's going to happen. But it very much depends on how the situation is going to unfold. Where companies are very similar in their assessment is it's a big risk what different countries and governments are doing. For instance, risks such as enforced isolation. This is not just absolutely unpredictable at the moment. It's also going to be a big risk in the next month and probably years to come. And if we really look into the future in terms of 1 to 3 years, and when we designed the survey, we said when the corona pandemic is over, but we don't know if it's really going to be over in a year from now, but in the next 1 to 3 years, what does it mean? And then interesting finding is that 60% of all respondents are convinced that there's going to be an increased use of virtual work. So things like we used to do in person before, we may just continue doing that virtually because it works out. And I think this particular session is an excellent example to meet virtually and discuss things that are relevant to all of us without having to travel. Organizing work across the globe doesn't necessarily have to be done by using international assignees, at least not to that extent. And that is also reflected in business travel. So 40% believe that business travel is going to be reduced, although there's another 1/3 who believes now it's going to go back to normal. And as Michael said initially, reducing short-term assignments and also reducing long-term assignments may be a result of this crisis. But then again, if we look at the verbal comments and the information we got in addition to the survey, the underlying communication to us was always, well, the problem is we don't know that, so we're making decisions under uncertainty, and so all we can do is basically look case by case, day by day, week by week, and then take it from there.
Right, if I could just interject there, thank you very much indeed, both to Ben and to Michael for that very interesting oversum of the COVID-19 survey preliminary results anyway. we're going to broaden this out. We're already slightly overrunning on our time, but it doesn't especially matter. But if I could just say to you, David Enser, if you could perhaps broaden it out and just introduce some of the other people we'll be talking to very briefly before we move on to our breakout sessions.
Yeah, sure. So I'm very pleased to be joined here on a panel by two very esteemed guests in particular. We have Amy Ansimos from EY, and Amy is based in Boston. Amy, are you there?
Yep. Hi, everyone.
And we also are very grateful to have Lindsay Hare, who's an in-house GM practitioner and also head of diversity and inclusion for Santander Bank, based in the US, also in Boston. Lindsay, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks
Doing
for
great.
joining.
How are you?
Great stuff. Thanks for joining. All good at this end. So perhaps I can start with you, Lindsay. I mean, obviously you've been privy to the results. You've heard Michael and Ben's comments about benefits changes and communication, potential impact on travel. Really looking at this in terms of now, what happens next, and then of course what's beyond the next. But from your perspective, you know, perhaps to come back to one of the points I think that Ben made about how guidance is evolving continuously, is there anything that you could talk about that you've seen either at your employer or of course in GM more broadly in terms of this evolution of guidance over the course of the last few weeks?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of my particular role, I'm responsible for all mobility and also diversity and inclusion throughout the US. And really what we've seen is it's really, for Santander, we've really retreated back to a local model. So what corporate has done for us is really said, you have bandwidth, each country, to decide what is practical for you and how you want to work. And particularly for something the size of the States, every state is having a different of challenge. Boston, unfortunately, we're still having a lot more cases. And what we did is basically we repatriated everybody back home. It was on a short-term assignment before the borders closed. That was a not a particularly fun conversation to have with the business, but in the long sight, that was the right thing to do. And I think in terms of what we see for future is we're really looking to Europe to see how they start basically starting the world again for Santander and what that looks like. But I kind of agree with what's been said. I think this has been an opportunity for the business to see that business can continue without necessarily people being on site, being in front of people. And I think what we will see is definitely a drastic reduction in the amount of short-term assignments and assignments going forward.
Thank you, Lindsay. Very interesting indeed. I mean, perhaps now if we can just go to Amy. Amy, you know, again on the topic of, you know, the evolution of guidance and what comes from this, would there be anything that you would add?
Yeah, I think that it really kind of hit people hard. I don't think people were really prepared for it. So what we've seen probably on the professional services side is a real kind of skill to be agile and to adapt as we move forward, especially in the US. You know, it's very difficult this happened all around the H-1B filing season and the cap season. But globally, generally, the kind of rule of thumb has been take every day as it comes and kind of be as agile as possible to support our clients and their employee workforce.
And particularly perhaps with regard to your own organization as well. So EY, not the consultancy part, but the internal operation of EY as a whole. You know, what's your feeling on how the whole process has been managed? Obviously, a lot of people will be looking to EY at times such as this for guidance, but they must, of course, have their own internal protocols for the business.
Yeah, I think we, as a business, we have followed generally the rules of what a lot of people have done. So we've shut down on domestic travel, we've shut down on international travel. We are all working from home, and assignments as well has been tough, as Lindsay kind of alluded to. We have brought people back home or kind of made arrangements for people on longer term assignments. But I think the what I've seen from EY is a real focus on the people and the duty of care for the employees. Even myself, just based here in the US, I'm not on an assignment, but just the support that I've had as a foreign national has been good, and I think that kind of speaks volumes with other industries and other providers as well. I think that we're all just trying to follow each other and see what each other are doing, but I think it's so far so good.
Indeed. I think that's perhaps as a final point before we switch to the breakout sessions. I would agree. I think it comes back to what Ben said about the concept of duty of care obligations has certainly come to the fore. Making sure that you, as an international employer, are communicating even too much with people that may feel very isolated, as you say, Amy, stuck overseas. Perhaps they've just arrived on assignment and suddenly the world already in a foreign place, and suddenly this foreign place is closed down around them. And I think that feeling of, I certainly get the sense that there's a feeling of moral obligation on the part of international employees to make sure that their overseas staff are taken care of, when it comes to things like travel, security questions, security fears, or concerns about health, as Ben mentioned or Ben and Michael mentioned, when it comes to a focus on making sure that employees are communicated to when it comes to, for example, insurance. Obviously, health insurance is a big fear at the moment. Ben, Michael, would there be anything that you would add before we would switch over to the breakout sessions?
Michael? Just unmuting. No, I'm fine. I think we can discuss that in the breakout sessions as well.
Good.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That's excellent. No, I agree. This is, according to our schedule, we're pretty much on time. So we can move over now to our breakout sessions, which is going to be an interesting logistical challenge, but I think one we'll probably be able to master. This is where those people who've joined on Zoom will go over to separate rooms. I'll show you what those rooms are. And whilst they're moving over to those, we will continue here on YouTube Live with our own discussion, including with Amy, and also we'll be talking to Lindsay as well, and David Schofield. But let's hand over now to Ken, who is going to take people into their breakout sessions, and let me show you what those breakout sessions are going to be. There we are. You can see right there are different breakout rooms where people will be going from now on. They'll be moving into room 1, what will our industry look like in 6 to 12 months' time? Room 2, technology, innovation, and incident response. And in room 3, policy responses to COVID-19 and additional benefits. So, if people want to break out into those rooms, that's brilliant. And we will now continue on YouTube live with, first of all, just a short video insert while people get themselves sorted out. And then we'll come back. Don't go away, because we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. And we'll be bringing you first of all, this discussion, and then we'll be bringing back the people from their breakout session. So don't go away. Join us in just a few moments.
没有根儿，一顶，它是为了上下。all downhill. You're holding me up, but I'm selling these tickets for you for $32.50. We can't even afford to pay the actors. The prices are so low.
Welcome back. Thank you for waiting. I hope you saw some of those images, which of course are images before COVID-19 took hold, the world as it once was, and hopefully the world as it will become again very soon. Now, I think we may have had a slight problem with the breakout rooms, but hopefully most people have now gone into the breakout rooms, and we here on YouTube Live are joined by three guests, well, four, including me, I suppose. Don't suppose I'm quite a guest, but we're joined by Amy, who you've already met, and Lindsay, and of course, David Schofield as well. And we're just going to have a little brief chat. Again, if you say something on YouTube, you will be, I can see that we have people putting up questions. Just say hi, tell us where you are in the world. It's good to get a, you know, as big a scope as we can, hoping that people can join us from all over the world. For this section, we're going to be talking while the people who have joined on Zoom, and you will have had an invite for that, they go to the breakout sessions, and they'll be back in about 10-15 minutes, and we'll hear what they have talked about, hopefully. Again, as I said before, it is a live session, so really anything could happen and probably will. But anyway, it's great to have Amy there with us, for example. I'll just turn over to you. Amy, if I can begin, you were beginning to talk a little bit early on about the particular problems that you've been having. And I mean, it must be incredibly difficult for you to maintain, you know, the consistent duty of care, given that, you know, the government's advice is changing all the time, and it's changing inconsistently, given each government has a different take. I mean, how are you dealing with all of that?
Kind of, like I said, really, we're kind of taking it day by day and looking at the kind of legislation and the updates and the reports from each country, and kind of addressing that as we go. It's some countries are a lot easier than others, but I think we saw it, especially to start with China and the APAC region, and then kind of saw that obviously spread across globally. But it's something that we really trying to support with in terms of, actually probably really in terms of data. So we're helping our clients to see where people are, how many people are there, do they have family, how long they've been there, what visas they're on. So to help make strategies and exit plans, and to support with the kind of information side of things to help them to support their business decisions.
Now, without talking about specific cases, I mean, in general, can you give me examples, of how it's really hit home, without obviously naming names?
Yep, of course. So I had one company who were a big kind of they have a big mechanical engineering group in China, for example, who are on rotation, and they were hit by the sort of initial first wave, and there was they stopped shipments of food, they stopped shipments of basically everything into the place where they were in China, and that really, people really struggled with that, because then they were like, how do we address this? Because the government's shutting down airspace, how do we get people out? It was, I think, pretty cold at the time. People were saying, their life was being really severely impacted by the, just everyday life. They wanted heaters, they needed food, they didn't really know what to do. And I think now, much further down the line, a few weeks later, we're trying to learn from that, and they were trying to, they're now trying to implement what they did in China kind of globally. But I think at the time when it hit, it was just very difficult. They didn't know kind of how to address it. Should we take people out? Should we extradite people and bring people home? What do we do? And then there was the personal piece, the employee piece, employees saying, I want to leave. I'm on rotation. I need to get out. I need to go home. And then, the client was kind of saying, we don't know. How do we do that? Can we do that? And I think, and those things take time, and sometimes you do have to assess it day by day, and you just don't know.
Can I bring you in here, Lindsay? I think you might be having a few problems hearing us. If so, please let me know. But if you can hear me, perhaps I can ask you a couple of questions. Maybe you could tell me whether you can hear me or not. I think we've got a technical problem. That's the nature of being in Boston, of course, which is where you are, funnily enough, Amy. But it's a big, Massachusetts, interesting state. David Schofield, while you're there, one of the issues that we were going to be discussing was government responses to this. We were hoping to get a British government spokesperson on here, but I think you've gathered, so far they've not been able to make it, but I think you've gathered a certain amount of information anyway. So perhaps you could pass that on to us.
Yes, that's right, John, and thanks for this opportunity. One of my jobs as strategic advisor to the RES Forum is actually to try and bring the kind of wider perspective, I guess you'd say, from the commercial, strategic risk and the government aspect. One of my last roles at PwC, a number of you knew me there in my global mobility roles, was in fact as Director of Risk Management, which was very appropriate, as it turned out, to the situation we're now in. I think we at RES Forum actually have been quite impressed as far as the UK government's concerned in terms of its willingness to engage with the business world during the current crisis. The Department for International Trade actually specifically, one of their most senior leaders sent me this morning, and I think you saw it, a message saying they would have liked to have been speaking on this session with us. They couldn't make it work for diary reasons, but they did say they wanted to send their best wishes to the international business community through this medium. I think it shows they want to reach out and engage. We've also heard specifically at a senior level from the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office and from the Home Office. The Home Office in particular have recently issued some useful guidance for businesses. This is particularly for the UK audience, I must confess, but giving the reassuring and I think very sensible message that nobody will be penalised for overstaying work visas in the UK because of the COVID-19 situation. They passed that guidance on to us. It's not unique to the Res Forum, but I think it's striking they wanted to use this channel to get the message out to employers. So one thing we can do very soon after this meeting is finished is issue that guidance direct to everyone who's attended this call. So good response, I think, slow at first, but getting more rapid from the UK government departments.
Thank you very much, David. We are getting people sending us messages. Thank you very much on YouTube. Quite a few asking why they haven't been able to join the Zoom breakout sessions, and that's because those people who asked to join were given a specific link. We will, as I say, we'll try to improve all of these processes in our future virtual interactive meetings. It's interesting to see we have someone from Harmony Relocation greeting us there, Matt Andrisani. This is the pronunciation issue, but I think that's correct. Matt Andrisani is in the Czech Republic. Excellent. Paul Barnard is in Amsterdam. Of course, that's in the Netherlands. We don't have any other specific questions. I don't know if you can hear me now, Lindsay. Is that, are you with us? Let me see. I think you still have a problem there. Maybe I need to unmute your microphone. Let's have a look if that helps things. No, so still a problem. So I'll come back to you, I think, at this point, Amy. Just give us an idea of looking further forward. And, you know, the big issue, of course, here is we've entered lockdown in most of these countries. We are possibly getting to a plateau as far as the disease is concerned. The question now is, how do we get out of it? And I imagine you're having to think about that pretty carefully. Have you come up with any ideas, you know, any preliminary ideas? I mean, I know it's very uncertain.
Yeah, I think unfortunately it is incredibly uncertain, and I think people are wary to make too many future plans, especially since, you know, we've kind of been told we're going to come out of this and then maybe go back into it around the autumn, fall time. And so I think companies are trying to make sure that they are mitigating risks as much as they can, but also they have to run their businesses. And I think that's the unfortunate side that we are seeing, is the planning for furloughs and layoffs and things like that. And I think, unfortunately, those things from a business perspective are inevitable. But it's helping people to plan for those as well. And I think it just is so uncertain. But I know that we're certainly getting questions now around kind of advisory for talent workforce. So how do we structure our talent workforce? How do we maybe move people around, diversify people with different skill sets, you know, in order to keep jobs? You know, how can we move people around to support? And so that's kind of what we're looking at a lot at the moment, is kind of that workforce talent piece, and like helping people to assess who they've got where, what skills have we got, and you know, how can we redeploy them in a different way.
Thank you. I'm going to have another stab at talking to Lindsay. I think that your phone is muted, but maybe you can speak and maybe we can see that. I don't know if you can unmute it yourself. No, I think you can hear us, but we can't actually hear you, which is a bit of an unfortunate situation. It does say just down at the bottom there that you are muted, but that sounds like
okay. We'll try again.
Oh, excellent! There we are now. The question I wanted to ask you, Lindsay, actually was, you know, the difference between a nationwide policy and a global policy at this time. I mean, how are you at Santander dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much structured that way anyway. So in terms of expatriate policies, that is a global approach. But then locally, we are allowed to have domestic programs and international programs. So we're pretty much set up, ready to go for that. And I feel like the vice grip of corporate was released pretty quickly, allowing us to make our own decisions. And in terms of local exceptions, what we saw were, you know, again, kind of with the duty of care, we're not really in hardship locations. other than Mexico, but we saw a lot of exceptions in terms of flight approvals, extended temporary accommodation, just really to support our families to get through this. So it was just very reasonable. But in terms of policies, that was really, released to a local level at the point that this crisis occurred.
Which I guess is the only way you can do it, since every locality is going to be different. It's almost impossible to have a worldwide policy on this.
Yeah, and particularly for the states. I mean, every state we have, 50 odd states that we're dealing with on top. So, there was just no way that corporate was going to mandate anything to us in the US. They kind of just released the reins to us.
And I know you can't talk about specific cases, but I mean, are there any things that, have really struck you during these last few weeks? Changes in the way that you're doing business? What has really struck you?
Yeah, I mean, from an immigration perspective, as Amy said, this hit, of course it hit bang on H-1B season, but what I really saw was things that have actually been very difficult for us at Santander. Sometimes I say that we're a great place to work, but not particularly easy place to work. Some of the blocks were removed. So something like H-1B postings, we managed to get that up on our intranet site. And I just think it was, as Amy was saying before, it's about taking day by day. We've become very nimble. So, I personally feel like for the first 3 weeks of the crisis, as it began to hit the States, it was a 16-hour day. I mean, everything was being thrown at us in the kitchen sink. It was all coming to HR. And I think, what we were doing 3 weeks ago is kind of evened out a little bit, but we're always on guard, ready for the next thing. So, just being nimble, being open and flexible, and being supportive is really our game plan, and that's how we're taking it, day by day right now.
Very interesting. And I've actually got a question just come in from Paul Barnard. He asks, do many people currently on assignment want to cut that assignment short and return home? I mean, that's an interesting point.
I mean, for Santander, we made that call for them. So I said, if they were on a short-term assignment, it was a difficult conversation. Some people had only been here a couple of weeks. We do something called Program Mundo Santander, which is a 4-month, 3 to 4 month amazing opportunity for people to go and experience a different country and share best business practice. Some of those poor people had been planning to come for a year. They'd been here 2 weeks, and we were like, guys, we're getting you home. And that was a horrible decision to make at the time. We weren't sure if we were being over aggressive. We were taking advice from our security teams that they thought this was going to happen, and we did. If there was people that were here and they'd been here for a significant amount of time and they had a lot more time, we have a couple of Brazilians that are still here in New York. We had long conversations with them. They decided to stay for the full term. I kind of got overridden as the head of mobility for that, because if it was me, I would be more nervous that we're going to get to the end of their visa and I'm going to get stuck, as I'll probably be calling Amy for some advice. But yeah, we only have a couple left in the States. The rest, we made the call. We were like, guys, we think the best program here is to get you home. And to be honest, 99% of our assignees kind of took our decision and went with it.
Great, that's excellent. Thank you very much. Now I'm being told that the breakout sessions are coming to an end, and you can see up there most of our guests coming back. So I'll just remind you of what those breakout sessions were. We've been on air here on the YouTube channel, those who were signed up to the Zoom breakout sessions, they will now have moved back into this, if you like, the plenary. We're trying to move people into the plenary. So if I bring up here now a slide that shows you what the topics were in those different rooms, you can see that in room 1, they were talking about what will our industry look like in 6 to 12 months time. In room 2, they were talking about technology, innovation, and incident response. And in room 3, they were talking there primarily about policy responses to COVID-19. So in a few moments, they will be back, and I will hand over to David Enser to introduce the spokespeople for those different breakout sessions so that we can hear in more detail what they've been saying. So welcome back to all of you. The breakout sessions are coming to an end, and we will then be able to talk to people. So let's go over now to our panel who have reassembled this, the magic of interactive communication, which I suppose we're all starting to get used to, more or less. And if you look on the screen, you can see that David Inser is there at the top, and it's his role now to tell us precisely what it was that was discussed, and also to bring us up to date with what people decided or talked about in those breakout sessions. So over to you then, David.
Thank you very much. What I will do, John, is I will quickly summarize the discussion. We had a great discussion in our breakout room. I took the one on technology, innovation, and major incident response. So what I'll do is I'll take a couple of minutes to run people through what we talked about, and then I'll hand off to Andrea. Andrea Piacentini is based in Glasgow in Scotland. And he will take you through the output from his breakout group. He's a Res Forum partner and a long-term friend. And then also we'll switch over after Andy to Jose Segade for the third summary of the third breakout room. So from my side, as I mentioned, we talked about technology, innovation, and major incident response. And I think we had some fascinating examples. Of course, there are the obvious ones. We talked about many of us are, have families. Excuse me. So seeing education digitalize overnight. If it works for children, it can also, of course, work for employees as well in terms of learning and personal development. I wonder what developments we'll see there. In the subject of, health and innovation, you've seen this huge leap forward. You've got online triaging. For anyone who knows an organization called GPDQ, a UK-based startup, they're now doing global coronavirus triaging over the phone with registered doctors, and just started up like that, and they're up and running overnight. I find that fascinating. You've got Formula One teams going from concept to design to testing to production of ventilators in the space of 2 to 3 weeks. If you look at what Mercedes have been doing in partnership with the UK Health Service. We heard from Aneta in Hong Kong, working for Arup. The whole team has switched over to Microsoft Teams to engage and to work together as remote teams. Bruno from IBM in Canada talked about, on the one hand, there's a travel ban, which is perhaps as envisaged, but at the same time, there's been and will continue to be a continued investment in IT infrastructure from IBM to make sure that the infrastructure and the bandwidth, if you will, is there in future to support increased remote working. I think we heard a fascinating statistic from Dawn at Micron in Boise, Idaho. 70% of business travel just cut overnight, down to 30%. Everyone else is going to be working remotely from now on. And we were speculating what, of course, that might mean for remote working or virtual assignments. If you're, say, based in location A, but all of your work and the economic benefit is being received by a different company entity, what that might mean for policy, although perhaps that's a question for the policy group. We talked, of course, about leadership around this concept of virtual and remote working and working remotely through technology. I think Ben from Newcastle University stressed the point that it's not remote working as normal, and that's a fundamental point to raise. So as leaders, of course, leaders need to be helping employees and teams to understand tolerance, to have an appreciation for everyone's personal circumstances. I give the personal example. I was on a conference call a couple of weeks ago. My boys were here because it's the Easter holidays. And I was on a call, there was a little background noise from the boys, and the person who I was speaking to started shouting and telling me to take it seriously. I was a little taken aback by that. But I think as leaders can be reinforcing principles of understanding tolerance and that this is not normal times. I think Alejandra from Johnson & Johnson in Switzerland and Zurich talked about, there's been even mass locations or relocations of production sites, which is a huge thing. It's not a project that I would want to, of course, undertake in times like this. And finally, Ben from Newcastle University talked that he sees that in terms of managing GM going forward from this, we're going to see a whole lot more integration, digital integration. It's a point that I personally believe very much in. I strongly agree with this concept of marrying employee experience with complex compliance, particularly, of course, if there's virtual assignments and more remote working. What does that mean from a compliance framework, and how can it best be managed? And then, of course, global employee traveller tracking. I, as a practitioner previously as head of program for a major DAX 30 German company, I can testify that when we had the Fukushima incident or the flooding in Bangkok some years ago, not quite at the same scale as COVID-19, but still they presented us huge challenges with traveller tracking, knowing where people were, and then being able to communicate in a proper fashion with these people in disparate locations worldwide. First of all, identifying who you have, and then secondly, then communicating. But I don't want to hold the microphone too much, so perhaps Andrea, I could pass over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. So our session was pretty good. We talked about what would the industry look like in 6 to 12 months. And in essence, this sort of slightly overlapped with adaptations in policy types. But in essence, what people were beginning to play with was a further evolution of what we call assignment models. So first of all, people talked about virtual assignments and what that could look like. Now, by a virtual assignment, that actually means that you're part of the host team, but you work remotely. And therefore, do you adapt to the host time zone? Now, Paula from Arup said this is something they were thinking about. You're on virtual assignment, therefore, if you're assigned to the US from the UK, your working time zone is a US time zone. And that's quite a mind-blowing thing. And yet it's something that they're playing with. But the biggest issue actually was something that I talked about with Jerry O'Neill of the Res Forum a few weeks back, which was how do you shape virtual teams? And if people aren't willing to go long-term, how do you integrate shorter-term assignments, if you like, to the management of virtual teams? I'll tell you what I mean by that. Let's just say I'm a newly appointed manager and my team sits in another location. So it's virtually a me and them. How do I build rapport and management of that team? Now, one of the models talked about was a type of version of short-term commuting, whereby maybe for the first 6 months, the person goes out for a week, a month, integrates with the team, understands the culture of a team, in order that at the end, that can then be managed fully remotely. And this is something that Brigitte of DOCA GmbH, Brigitte Login, talked about, something that they're working with, something that's actually in place in that organisation. And I found that a fascinating idea. And I think this will be the start of the journey. And we ended up with some contributions also from Roxana of HSBC, where she actually is a person that was virtually onboarded to a new team in the last few weeks. And it all happened offline. She had some concerns going into it, and she's actually found the whole thing worked really well and efficiently. Why is that? Well, probably a lot to do with the culture of HSBC. There appeared to be already an existing culture of virtual working. One of the things we as a group in our session talked about was using technology as an equalizer. So where virtual working can be challenging is when you're the one guy dialing into a meeting of a room of people, and all it takes is 2 people to talk, and it's just white noise. The equalizer is something like this, where we're all dialed in, even though the whole team might be sitting in a location. We make a point of all dialing in from our desk on a Skype call or whatever technology, and suddenly we're all engaging in the same way using the same technology enablement. And so you'll begin to see things like that. Now, my provocative question to the group was, what does this mean for GM professionals? Will your skills still be the same, i.e. operationalizing moves from A to B? What will your skills move to? Will you move from tactical operation to actually an enabler of virtual working? And where will your skills now be required? Where will they sit? What will you need to contribute to the discussion of HR? And nobody really had the answers, but we did see an evolution of global mobility skills, whereby.
Andy, sorry to interrupt you there. I think there's so much to talk about that we could go on and on, but we're unfortunately getting close to the end of our live stream. So if you don't mind, I'll just quickly ask Jose to come in And again, we can make this the topic of other of our VIMs, and we can go into these in more detail. But Jose, just for the sake of this one, let's quickly hear from you what you spoke about in your BROCAT session.
Yeah, I think the key thing was, obviously there's been an exercise to engage with HR and the business around the active assignee population. So to understand, what is the business need, but what's the individual need as well, and extending to individuals that are saying that pre-move phase as well. What we discussed, I think often there's a quite a difficult balancing act between ensuring business continuity and actually what's feasible at the moment. As we know, borders are closed, visa processing centres are often closed as well. So, mobility is in quite a tricky position. So, we discussed some of the challenges around navigating that. And then probably from a policy perspective, as Andy has said, the virtual assignment has really come into play, and that can be quite straightforward situations where individuals are just in their home location, maybe have started their assignment, which is generally a bit more straightforward, but it could be people who've moved themselves to an alternative third location. And that brings with it a number of challenges. So again, it was around how do you balance the individual need versus, what from a business perspective is reasonable and possible and compliant.
Excellent. Thank you, Jose. We've actually already run over time. So, and we've got a couple of great questions on YouTube, which I think we won't be able to address at the moment because of the time constraints. I will try to bring those in future VIMs. But David, if I can just turn to you, David Enser, that is, to do a little wrap up, and then we will draw this first VIM, first Res Forum Live to a conclusion. David.
Thank you, John. Yeah, excuse me. So very much on our agenda is to do future virtual sessions. As I mentioned at the beginning of today's meeting, we had a full program of events planned out for Hong Kong, Shanghai, Singapore, 5 locations overall in China, Singapore, right across Europe, and of course throughout the US as well. And all of that is currently on hold. But what we do want to do is make sure that we continue to provide relevant opportunities to bring Res Forum members and industry experts together in this virtual format, and also to preserve the flavour and the regional focus that we've had through face-to-face events. So you can expect in future that we will be running more events for Asia Pacific, for EMEA, and also for the Americas, and perhaps at slightly kinder time zones, given that for people joining on the west coast of the US, or for people joining from Asia, it's either very early in the morning or getting towards bedtime. So that's something that we intend to keep in consideration for future sessions. And I would anticipate, look out for our next session, but it will be within the next month. Likewise, we will also be bringing into those sessions some very interesting external speakers. One group we're in touch with is the British government, of course, and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, specifically the Department for International Trade. If you believe the figures, there have been conflicting statistics, but if the people are talking about a 35% fall in the UK economy. Now, I've also seen it's a 35% drop in growth, which is, of course, 2 very different things. But I think this concept of having some governments to come and talk to us about the consequences for global trade, and of course the knock-on impact as to how that might then affect international hiring, will also be focus features for the virtual sessions that we have from this point out. So with that in mind, I would also say thank you very much for everybody's time and everyone's contribution, both to the panel sessions, to Lindsay and to Amy and to David, and to all my Res Forum partners, Jose and Andrea, and of course to you, John and Ken, for helping us do this and bring this together technically, and to everyone that joined from around the world, a huge and sincere thank you. Back to you, John.
Thank you very much indeed. And so bringing back to this control room for our very first, the end of our very first Res Forum Live, and I think there will be a lot of feedback that people will want to give. In the nature of live broadcasting, of course, it's pretty much anything can happen, and that is the challenge, but it's also the potential. So we want to know what you think. Please make sure that you let us know exactly what you think of what we did today, how it can be improved. But for now, thank you very much indeed for watching. Thank you for participating as well. Be sure to look out for our next virtual interactive meeting. But for now, goodbye and stay safe.